Clara had just settled into the quiet rhythm of her evening, savoring the rare moment of stillness in her bustling life. The soft hum of the dishwasher and the faint glow of the kitchen light were her only companions as she sipped her tea. The apartment felt peaceful, almost serene, until the sharp buzz of the doorbell shattered the calm. She frowned, setting her mug down with a soft clink. She wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, she saw her younger sister Mia standing there with a bright but slightly forced smile. Clara hesitated, her hand lingering on the doorknob. Mia had a habit of showing up unannounced, but tonight her presence felt more unsettling than usual. There was something about the way Mia's eyes darted around the hallway, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, that made Clara's stomach tighten. She opened the door, the cool evening air rushing in. "Mia," she said, her voice warm but cautious. "This is a surprise." Mia stepped inside, her energy almost palpable. "I've been dying for a little getaway," she said breezily, brushing past Clara with a suitcase in tow. "Thought I'd crash here for a few days. You don't mind, do you?" Clara forced a smile, though her unease grew. "Of course not. You're always welcome." Mia's arrival was like a gust of wind sweeping through the apartment, disrupting the fragile calm. She was younger than Clara by 5 years, but her confidence and charisma often made her feel like the older sister. Mia's presence was always intense, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling that this visit would be no different. The sound of the shower running in the background filled the apartment, a steady hum that seemed to underscore the tension. Ethan, Clara's 19-year-old stepson, was home. Mia's eyes flicked toward the sound, her curiosity piqued. "Someone's here?" she asked, her tone light but tinged with something else, something Clara couldn't quite place. "Ethan," Clara replied quickly, her voice steady despite the prickle of unease crawling up her neck. "He's been staying with me since... well, you know." Mia nodded, her gaze lingering in the direction of the bathroom. "How's he doing?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. Clara hesitated, unsure how much to share. "He's adjusting," she said finally, choosing her words carefully. "It's been hard for both of us." Since her husband Greg had left 2 years ago, Clara had been trying to hold her blended family together. It hadn't been easy. Ethan, Greg's son from a previous relationship, had moved in with her after the breakup, and their relationship had been fraught with tension from the start. Clara struggled to connect with him, their interactions often laced with unspoken resentment. She felt like an outsider in her own home, a role she hadn't anticipated when she married Greg. Ethan's quiet defiance and her own insecurities as a stepmother had created a chasm between them that seemed impossible to bridge. He was polite, but distant, his teenage aloofness magnified by the upheaval in their lives. Clara had tried to reach out to find common ground, but it felt like every step she took only drove them further apart. Mia wandered into the living room, her movements easy and familiar, as though she belonged there. "This place hasn't changed much," she remarked, running a finger along the edge of the coffee table. Clara followed her, her unease growing. "Yeah, well, I haven't had much time for redecorating," she said, her tone dry. Mia laughed, the sound light and melodic, but it didn't ease Clara's tension. She sat down on the couch, crossing her legs and looking up at Clara with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "So, what's new with you?" Clara sighed, sitting down across from her. "Not much. Work's been busy and, well, you know how it is." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the shower turning off. Clara's eyes flicked toward the hallway, her nerves jangling. She didn't know why, but the thought of Ethan and Mia in the same space made her uncomfortable. "So Ethan's here," Mia said, her tone casual but her gaze sharp. "How's that working out for you?" Clara shrugged, her shoulders tense. "It's complicated," she said finally. Mia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I bet," she said softly. Mia had always been the type to act first and think later. After Clara retreated to her room for the night, Mia decided to take a shower. She grabbed a towel from the linen closet and made her way to the bathroom, humming softly to herself. The door was slightly ajar, and she pushed it open without a second thought. The sight that greeted her stopped her in her tracks. Ethan was there, standing in front of the sink, his towel slung low around his hips. He froze, his eyes widening in shock as he caught sight of Mia in the mirror. For a moment, neither of them moved. Mia's breath caught in her throat as her eyes traveled over him, taking in the unexpected sight. Ethan's cheeks flushed scarlet and he quickly turned away, fumbling with his towel. Sorry," Ethan stammered, his voice thick with embarrassment. "I didn't think anyone would come in." Mia's initial shock gave way to something else, a flicker of amusement perhaps, or something more mischievous. She leaned against the doorframe, her lips curling into a sly smile. "Well, this is awkward," she said, her tone teasing. Ethan glanced at her warily, his body tense. I'll get out of here," he muttered, reaching for his clothes. Mia stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate. "No need to rush on my account," she said, her voice low. "You've got nothing to be embarrassed about." Ethan's eyes widened, his discomfort palpable. "Mia, She cut him off with a soft laugh, her hand brushing against his arm in a gesture that was both comforting and unnerving. "Relax, Ethan," she said, her tone light but her gaze intense. "It's just a little harmless teasing." Her eyes flicked downward, her smile widening as she noticed his reaction to the situation. "Well, well," she murmured, her hand moving to trace a faint line along his chest. "Looks like someone's a little nervous." Ethan's breath hitched, his body stiffening under her touch. "Mia, don't." She shushed him gently, her fingers trailing lower, just grazing the edge of his towel. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. "It's just us." For a moment, Ethan seemed frozen, caught between embarrassment and something else, something that made his pulse race and his thoughts scatter. But before he could react, Mia pulled away, stepping back with a playful smile. "I'll let you finish up," she said, her tone casual again, as though nothing had happened. She turned and walked out of the bathroom, leaving Ethan standing there, his mind reeling. The next morning, the apartment felt unusually quiet, the kind of silence that seemed to hum with unspoken tension. Clara stood in the kitchen, her coffee mug in hand, glancing between Mia and Ethan as they sat at the breakfast table. Mia seemed perfectly at ease, humming softly as she buttered her toast, while Ethan kept his eyes glued to his cereal bowl, his shoulders tense. Clara tried to break the silence. "So, what are you two planning to do today?" Mia shrugged, her tone casual. "Not much. Maybe I'll explore the neighborhood. It's been a while since I've been here." Ethan muttered something unintelligible under his breath, his spoon clinking against the bowl. Clara frowned, sensing the awkwardness, but unsure of its source. "Ethan, you okay?" she asked. He nodded quickly, still avoiding her gaze. "Yeah, just tired." Clara sighed, deciding not to press the issue. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. "Okay, well, I'm off to work. You two behave," she said, her voice light but her eyes lingering on Mia. Mia smiled, her expression innocent. "We'll be fine, Clara. Don't worry about us." The moment the door closed behind Clara, the atmosphere in the apartment shifted. Ethan sank into the couch, flipping through TV channels with little interest. Mia, on the other hand, seemed to come alive. She moved around the house in a short summer dress, her movements fluid and deliberate. She bent over to pick up stray magazines, adjusted cushions on the couch and straightened picture frames, all while Ethan tried and failed to ignore her. At one point, Mia paused in front of the TV, blocking Ethan's view. She tilted her head, her lips curling into a teasing smile. "You've been awfully quiet today," she said, her voice light but her eyes sharp. Ethan shrugged, keeping his gaze fixed on the TV. "Just not much to say." Mia stepped closer, leaning down until her face was inches from his. "Are you sure that's all it is?" she asked, her tone dropping to a whisper. "You seem a little tense. Ethan's jaw tightened, and he shifted uncomfortably. "I'm fine." Mia laughed softly, straightening up. "Relax, Ethan," she said, brushing past him. Her hand lingered on his shoulder for a moment longer than necessary. "I'm just teasing." Ethan exhaled slowly, his heart racing as Mia moved away. She continued her tasks, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were putting on a show. Every now and then she would glance at him, her smile widening when she caught him looking. As the day went on, the tension between them grew, unspoken but undeniable. When Clara returned home that evening, Mia was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner while Ethan sat at the table, his attention fixed on his phone. "How was your day?" Clara asked as she set her bag down. Mia glanced over her shoulder, her smile bright. "Oh, it was fine. Just hung around here most of the day." Ethan mumbled a non-committal response, his eyes never leaving his phone. Clara frowned, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. The three of them sat down to dinner, the conversation stilted and awkward. Clara tried to engage them in small talk, but Mia's responses were vague and Ethan barely spoke at all. Under the table, Mia reached over to Ethan's thigh, her touch light but deliberate. He stiffened, his fork clinking against his plate as he tried to maintain his composure. Clara glanced at him, her brow furrowing. "Everything okay, Ethan?" He nodded quickly, his voice strained. "Yeah, I'm fine." Mia's hand moved higher, her fingers teasing the edge of his pants. Ethan's breath hitched and he shifted in his seat, his face flushing scarlet. Clara, oblivious to what was happening, continued eating, her attention focused on her plate. Mia's gaze flicked toward Ethan, her lips curling into a sly smile. She leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but laced with amusement. "You seem a little jumpy tonight," she said, her tone innocent. Ethan's jaw tightened, and he glanced at her warily. "I'm fine," he said, his voice strained. Mia's hand lingered for a moment longer before she pulled away, her expression calm as she turned back to Clara. "So, Clara, how was work?" Clara sighed, launching into a story about her day, completely unaware of the tension simmering beneath the surface. After dinner, everyone retreated to their rooms. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that dared to break the night's silence. Ethan lay flat on his back, the sheets tangled around his legs, the weight of the day pressing down on him like a second blanket. His door groaned softly, a whisper of hinges protesting, and he turned his head sharply. Mia stood framed in the doorway, the dim glow from the hallway silhouetting her figure. Her nightshirt, thin and silky, clung to her like moonlight, shifting with every breath she took. Her hair, loose and messy, tumbled over her shoulders, and her lips curved into a smile that was equal parts mischief and something darker. "Hey," she said softly, her voice low like she was sharing a secret. Ethan blinked, his brain stumbling over the sight of her. "What are you doing here?" She stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind her. "Couldn't sleep," she said, tilting her head as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Figured you couldn't either." He stared at her, his mouth dry. "I'm fine." She laughed, a soft exhale that made the air feel heavier. "Sure you are," she said, her tone dripping with amusement. She moved closer, her bare feet silent against the carpet, and sat on the edge of his bed, the mattress dipping under her weight. Ethan's pulse thrummed in his ears. "Mia." "Relax," she said, her hand brushing his arm like she was calming a spooked animal. "I just need your help to unwind, that's all." Before he could argue, she slid onto the bed beside him, her body stretching out with a deliberate languor. She shifted, her leg brushing against his, and Ethan's breath hitched. The warmth of her skin seeped through the thin fabric of his shirt, and he felt his body betray him, reacting to her closeness in a way he couldn't rationalize. Her head turned, her eyes locking with his. "You're wound so tight," she murmured, her voice a soft purr. "Let me fix that." Her hand drifted to his chest, her fingers tracing lazy patterns over his shirt. Ethan's heart hammered, his thoughts scattering like leaves in a storm. "Mia," he started, his voice unsteady. She silenced him with a look, her eyes daring him to object. Her fingers slipped lower, under the waistband of his boxers, and Ethan's world narrowed to the feel of her hand on him. Her touch was firm but unhurried, her movements deliberate, as if she'd done this 1,000 times before. Ethan's jaw clenched, his hands gripping the sheets as if they could anchor him. "Better?" she asked, her tone light but her gaze heavy. He didn't answer, couldn't answer. His body was a taut wire, every nerve firing in response to her. Mia leaned in, her breath warm against his ear. "Let go," she whispered, her voice soft but commanding. Ethan's control unraveled, his back arched, his breath catching in his throat as he peeked. She didn't stop, didn't rush. Her touch was steady, guiding him through it, until he collapsed back against the mattress, his chest heaving. Mia sat up, her hand sliding away. She smiled, the corners of her mouth lifting in a way that made Ethan's stomach twist. "Sleep well," she said, her voice a low hum. She stood, her nightshirt whispering against her skin, and walked to the door. She paused, glancing back at him. "Sweet dreams, Ethan." The door clicked shut, leaving him alone in the dark. The idea of going to the summer house came up over breakfast. Mia, seated at the kitchen table with a piece of toast in one hand and her phone in the other, glanced up at Clara. "You know what we should do today?" she asked, her voice light but with a spark of mischief in her eyes. Clara, leaning against the counter with her coffee mug, raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Mia grinned. "Let's go to the summer house. It's been forever since we've been there, and it's supposed to be a perfect day for the pool." Clara hesitated, glancing at Ethan, who was sitting quietly at the table, his cereal untouched. "I don't know. I've got a lot of work to catch up on." Mia rolled her eyes. "Come on, Clara. When was the last time you took a day off? You've been buried in work for weeks. You need this. We all do." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his gaze fixed on the table. "I'm fine here," he muttered. Mia turned to him, her smile widening. "You're coming too, Ethan. No arguments. It'll be fun." Clara sighed, setting her coffee mug down. "All right, fine. But we're not staying overnight. Just a day trip." Mia clapped her hands, her excitement palpable. "Perfect. I'll pack the cooler." An hour later, they were on the road, the summer house just a short drive away. The journey was quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy with unspoken tension. Mia sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone and occasionally humming along to the radio. Clara focused on the road, her hands tight on the steering wheel. Ethan sat in the back seat, his headphones on but not playing anything, his gaze fixed on the blur of trees outside. When they arrived, the summer house looked exactly as Clara remembered it, a whitewashed cottage with a wraparound porch and a pool that sparkled in the sunlight. The air was warm, the scent of pine trees and fresh earth filling her lungs. Mia was the first one out of the car, her energy almost infectious. She grabbed the cooler from the trunk and headed straight for the pool, her laughter ringing out as she dipped her toes in the water. Clara followed more slowly, carrying a bag of towels and sunscreen. She spread a towel on one of the lounge chairs, tilting her face to the sun. "This is nice," she said, her voice soft. "Just what we needed." Ethan lingered by the car, his hands shoved in his pockets. "I'll just hang out here," he said, his tone hesitant. Mia glanced over at him, her lips curving into a sly smile. "Come on, Ethan. You're not going to sit in the car all day, are you?" He shrugged, his gaze flicking toward the pool. "Maybe later." Mia climbed out of the pool, water dripping from her bright red bikini as she walked toward him. She grabbed a towel, her movement slow and deliberate, her gaze lingering on his face. "You should get in," she said, her voice light but her eyes sharp. "The water's perfect." Ethan shook his head. "I'm good." Mia shrugged, dropping the towel on the edge of the pool. "Suit yourself?" She moved closer, brushing against him as she reached for the sunscreen on the table. Her skin was cool from the water, and the touch sent a jolt through Ethan's body. "Help me with this?" she asked, holding out the bottle to Clara. Clara took it, squinting at the label. Sure. She squeezed some lotion into her hands and began applying it to Mia's shoulders. Mia tilted her head, closing her eyes as Clara worked the lotion into her skin. Thanks, she murmured. Clara smiled, her hands moving down Mia's back. No problem. Mia's eyes flicked open, her gaze locking with Ethan's. You should help too, she said, her tone playful but her eyes intense. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. I'm good. Mia laughed, the sound light and melodic. Come on, Ethan, don't be shy. Clara glanced between them, her brow furrowing slightly. Be careful around her, she joked, her tone light but her eyes sharp. She's trouble. Mia grinned, her gaze never leaving Ethan's. Trouble's more fun, isn't it? Clara finished applying the sunscreen and handed the bottle back to Mia. There you go. All set. Mia took the bottle, her smile widening as she turned back to Ethan. Your turn. Ethan shook his head, his heart racing. I'm fine, thanks. Mia laughed, setting the bottle down. Suit yourself. She moved to the edge of the pool, her movements slow and deliberate. She glanced over her shoulder, her smile turning sly. You know, since we're all family here, maybe I should just go all out. Clara raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Mia's hands moved to the back of her bikini top, her fingers unhooking the clasp. Why bother with a swimsuit? We're all adults. Clara's eyes widened, but before she could say anything, Mia dropped the top on the ground, her bare skin gleaming in the sunlight. Ethan's breath caught in his throat, his gaze darting away as heat flooded his cheeks. Mia laughed, the sound light and carefree. Relax, Ethan, she said, her tone teasing. It's just skin. Clara stared at her sister, a mix of shock and amusement on her face. You're unbelievable, she said, shaking her head. Mia grinned, stretching her arms above her head. Life's too short to be shy. Clara hesitated for a moment before shrugging off her own top, her movements deliberate but confident. If you can't beat 'em, join 'em, she said, her tone light but her smile a little self-conscious. Ethan's eyes widened, his gaze flicking between the two women. He felt like he'd stepped into another world, one where the rules didn't apply and anything was possible. Mia laughed, clapping her hands. That's the spirit, she said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. The afternoon passed in a blur of sunlight and laughter, the tension between them simmering just beneath the surface. Ethan tried to focus on the water, the warmth of the sun on his skin, anything but the women lounging beside him, their bare skin gleaming like polished marble. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the feeling that something had shifted, that the lines between them had blurred in a way that could never be undone. The evening air was thick with the scent of grilled food and the faint tang of chlorine from the pool. They sat around the outdoor table, the flicker of citronella candles casting warm golden light over their faces. Dinner had been a quiet affair, the clinking of cutlery against plates the only sound breaking the silence. Ethan sat with his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting between Clara and Mia, his unease palpable. Mia, ever the provocateur, leaned back in her chair, a glass of wine in her hand. Remember when we were kids, Clara? She asked, her voice light but her eyes sharp. You were always the popular one with the boys. Clara laughed, though it sounded forced. Oh, please, you were the one who had them wrapped around your finger. Mia smirked, her gaze flicking toward Ethan. Maybe. But you were the one who broke a few hearts back then. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his fork clinking against his plate. Can we not talk about this? Mia ignored him, her smile widening. Why not? It's fun to reminisce. Clara glanced at Ethan, her brow furrowing slightly. Let's change the subject, Mia. You're making him uncomfortable. Mia shrugged, taking a sip of her wine. Fine. How about a game then? Something to lighten the mood. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What kind of game? Mia's smile turned sly. Never have I ever. You know, the classic. Clara groaned, though there was a hint of amusement in her voice. Really, Mia? We're not teenagers anymore. Exactly, Mia said, her tone teasing. Which means it'll be more interesting. Ethan hesitated, his gaze flicking between the two women. I don't think... Come on, Ethan, Mia interrupted, her voice light but insistent. Don't be boring. Clara sighed, leaning back in her chair. All right, fine. But I'm warning you, Mia, I'm not holding back. Mia grinned, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Neither am I. The game started innocently enough, with Mia asking questions like, never have I ever been late to work, and Clara countering with, never have I ever forgotten someone's birthday. But it didn't take long for the tone to shift. Mia took a sip of her wine, her gaze locking with Ethan's. Never have I ever had a threesome, she said, her voice casual but her eyes sharp. Clara raised an eyebrow, glancing at Mia. Really, Mia? Mia shrugged, her smirk widening. Just asking the real questions. Ethan froze, his cheeks flushing scarlet. He didn't drink, his silence all the confirmation they needed. Mia laughed, the sound light but laced with amusement. Looks like you're the odd one out, Ethan. Clara glanced at him, her expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. Well, that's unexpected. Ethan's hands clenched into fists under the table, his discomfort palpable. Can we not? Mia leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her gaze locking with his. Why, it's just a game, unless... Her voice trailed off, her smile turning sly. Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. Unless what? Mia's smirk widened. Unless you're curious. Clara laughed nervously, though there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that made Ethan's stomach twist. Mia, stop. You're embarrassing him. Mia shrugged, leaning back in her chair. Fine, but I think we all know who's holding back here. Ethan's face burned, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to leave, to get as far away from this conversation as possible, but he couldn't move, couldn't speak. Mia's smile softened, though her eyes remained sharp. You know, Ethan, you're not as mysterious as you think you are. Ethan's breath hitched, his gaze flicking toward Clara, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. Mia took another sip of her wine, her tone light but her words cutting. Like last night, for example, I didn't think you'd be so... impressive. Clara's eyes widened, her gaze snapping to Mia. What are you talking about? Mia's smile turned smug, her gaze never leaving Ethan's face. Oh, you know, just a little late-night visit to his room. He's quite the surprise. Ethan's blood ran cold, his mind racing. He wanted to protest, to deny it, but the words caught in his throat. Clara stared at Mia, her brow furrowing. What do you mean, Mia? Mia shrugged, her tone casual but her eyes intense. Exactly what I said. I stopped by his room last night and, let's just say, I wasn't disappointed. Clara's gaze flicked toward Ethan, her expression a mix of shock and something else, something that made his stomach churn. Is that true? Ethan's mouth went dry, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know how to respond, didn't know what to say. Mia laughed, the sound light but laced with amusement. Don't be shy, Ethan. Clara's just curious. Clara's eyes narrowed, her gaze locking with Ethan's. Show me. Ethan's breath caught in his throat, his mind reeling. What? Clara's expression was unreadable, her voice firm. Show me. I want to see. Ethan's world tilted on its axis, his heart pounding in his ears. He wanted to refuse, to walk away, but the intensity in Clara's gaze held him in place. Mia's smile widened, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Go on, Ethan. Don't keep us waiting. Ethan's hands trembled as he slowly stood up, his heart racing. He felt like he was in a dream or a nightmare. Clara's gaze never left his, her expression a mix of curiosity and something darker, something primal. Mia leaned back in her chair, her smile smug, her eyes gleaming with triumph. The candles on the table flickered, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Ethan sat on the couch, his posture stiff, his hands gripping the edge of the cushions like he was bracing for something. Mia stood in front of him, her hips swaying to the rhythm of a song only she could hear. Her movements were slow and deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. "Relax, Ethan," she purred, her voice low and velvety. "You're in good hands." Clara lingered by the side of the room, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. She'd been drawn into this moment, her initial shock giving way to something darker, something she couldn't quite name. Mia turned to her sister, her lips curling into a sly smile. "Come on, Clara," she said, her tone teasing. "You're not just going to stand there, are you?" Clara hesitated, her gaze flicking toward Ethan, who looked like he was about to bolt at any second. "Mia, this is fun," Mia finished for her, stepping closer. "It's supposed to be fun. Let go for once." Mia reached out, her fingers grazing Clara's arm, and Clara's resistance crumbled. She stepped forward, her movements tentative at first, but as the music, real or imagined, wrapped around her, she began to sway, her body mirroring Mia's. Ethan watched, his breath shallow, his heart pounding in his chest. The sisters moved together, their bodies brushing against each other in a way that felt both natural and forbidden. Mia's hands slid to Clara's waist, pulling her closer, and Clara didn't resist. Their lips met. A slow, deliberate kiss that sent a jolt through Ethan's body. He couldn't look away, his mind reeling as the two women he'd known his entire life seemed to transform before his eyes. When they pulled apart, Mia's smile was triumphant. "See?" she said, her voice soft but firm. "Nothing to be afraid of." Clara's cheeks were flushed, her breath coming in shallow gasps, but there was a glint in her eyes, a spark of something wild, something untamed. Mia turned back to Ethan, her movements slow and deliberate as she began to unbutton her blouse. The fabric slipped from her shoulders, revealing a lace bralette that clung to her like a second skin. Clara followed suit, her hands trembling slightly as she undid the buttons of her own shirt. Ethan's pulse quickened, his gaze flicking between them as they shed their clothes, revealing lingerie that was as daring as it was beautiful. Mia stepped closer, her hips swaying as she knelt in front of him. "Your turn," she murmured, her fingers brushing against his jaw. Ethan's breath hitched, his body tensing as Mia leaned in, her lips brushing against his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but it quickly deepened, her hands sliding to his chest. Clara watched, her own heart racing, before she moved closer, her hand resting on Ethan's shoulder. She leaned down, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was slow and deliberate, her touch sending a shiver down his spine. Mia's hands trailed lower, her fingers brushing against the waistband of his pants. "Let's see what we've been missing," she said, her voice a low purr. Ethan's hands clenched into fists, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He wanted to stop this, to push them away, but his body betrayed him, reacting to their touch in a way he couldn't control. Mia's fingers worked at the button of his pants, her movements unhurried, deliberate. When she pulled them down, Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Wow," Clara murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mia wasn't kidding." Mia laughed softly, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "Told you." Ethan's cheeks burned, his gaze flicking toward Clara, who was staring at him with a mix of shock and something else, something that made his stomach twist. Mia leaned in, her lips brushing against his ear. "Now it's your turn to show us what you can do," she whispered, her voice low and sultry. Ethan hesitated, his mind racing. He didn't know what to do, didn't know how to respond, but the intensity in their eyes held him in place. Mia's hand brushed against his thigh, her touch light but insistent. "Go on," she said, her tone soft but firm. Ethan's breath hitched, his heart pounding in his chest. Slowly, reluctantly, he reached down, his hand trembling as he began to move his hand. The sisters watched, their gazes heavy, their breaths shallow. Mia's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "There you go," she murmured, her voice soft but laced with approval. Clara's cheeks were flushed, her chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. She'd never imagined herself in a situation like this, but now that she was here, she couldn't look away. The warmth of the light played across their skin, casting shadows that danced and shifted with every breath they took. Ethan's breath hitched, his hand trembling as he continued to move it slowly, the sisters watching him with intense, unblinking gazes. Mia's lips curved into a knowing smile, her eyes gleaming with mischief, and something darker, something that made Ethan's stomach twist. She stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate, like a cat stalking its prey. Her bare feet made no sound against the carpet, but the weight of her presence was palpable. She knelt before him, her eyes never leaving his, her hands resting lightly on his knees. "Don't stop," she murmured, her voice low and velvety, a sound that seemed to wrap around him like a warm blanket. "Let us watch you." Clara hesitated for a moment, her gaze flicking between Mia and Ethan. There was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, a hesitation that spoke of the moral boundaries she was crossing. But then she exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing as she stepped forward, joining Mia on the floor. Her movements were less assured than her sister's, but there was a quiet determination in the way she knelt beside her hands trembling slightly as she reached out to touch Ethan's thigh. Ethan's breath hitched, his body stiffening under their touch. He wanted to speak, to protest, but the words caught in his throat, tangled in the web of desire and confusion that had ensnared him. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, shame, curiosity, and a raw, primal need that he couldn't ignore. Mia's hands trailed upward, her fingers brushing against his where he moved. She glanced up at him, her lips curving into a sly smile. "You're doing so well," she said, her tone light but her gaze heavy with intent. Clara's hand joined Mia's, her touch tentative at first but growing bolder as she mirrored her sister's encouragement. Together, they guided his movements, their hands overlapping his, their breaths mingling as they leaned closer. The sensations were overwhelming, a tidal wave of pleasure that threatened to drown him. Ethan's hands gripped the edge of the couch, his knuckles white as he fought to keep his composure. His breath came in shallow gasps, his heart pounding in his chest as the sisters took turns brushing against him, their touches growing bolder with every passing second. Mia's hand brushed against Clara's, guiding her, showing her the rhythm, the pressure, the timing. Clara followed her lead, her hesitation giving way to confidence as she matched her sister's pace. Their lips met over, a slow, deliberate kiss that was as much about their connection as it was about the act itself. Ethan's breath caught in his throat, his body arching as the pleasure built inside him, a fire that threatened to consume him. The room was a blur of warmth and motion, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows that danced on the walls. The sisters moved together, in perfect harmony, their touches alternating between teasing and intense. Mia's laughter, soft and breathy, mixed with Clara's murmurs of encouragement, the sounds weaving together into a symphony of desire. Ethan's thoughts, scattered, his mind a blank canvas painted with nothing but sensation. The world outside the room ceased to exist, the only reality the warmth of their hands, the softness of them, the intoxicating rhythm of their movements. When the finale came, it was like a thunderclap, left him breathless and trembling. The sisters shared a knowing smile, a silent acknowledgement of the line they had crossed, the bond they had forged in that moment. Ethan collapsed back against the couch, his chest heaving, his heart still racing. He felt spent, his body heavy with the weight of what had just happened. The room was silent now, the only sound the soft flicker of the candles and the quiet rustle of fabric as the sisters adjusted their positions. Mia stood first, her movements graceful and unhurried. She reached out, her hand brushing against Ethan's cheek in a gesture that was almost tender. "Sweet dreams," she murmured, her voice soft but laced with a hint of mischief. Clara hesitated for a moment longer, her gaze lingering on Ethan's face. There was a new awareness in her eyes, a realization of something she couldn't yet name. She stood slowly, her movements more deliberate, her expression thoughtful. They left the room together, their footsteps soft against the carpet, the door clicking shut behind them. Ethan remained on the couch, his mind racing, his body still thrumming with the aftershocks of what had just happened. He sat up slowly, his muscles aching with the effort, his body still humming with the echoes of pleasure. His gaze flicked toward the closed door of the sisters' room, a flicker of something raw and unspoken tugging at him. He hesitated for a moment, his breath catching in his throat, before he pushed himself to his feet. The floor was cool beneath his bare feet as he crossed the room, his steps deliberate but unsteady. His pulse quickened with each step, the weight of the night's events pressing down on him like a second skin. He paused outside their door, his hand hovering over the handle, his mind a whirlwind of doubt and desire. But the pull was too strong, the need too insistent. He turned the handle and pushed the door open, the soft creak of the hinges cutting through the silence like a knife. The room was dimly lit, the faint glow of the moon filtering through the curtains and casting the sisters in a soft, silvery light. They lay in bed, their bodies tangled in the sheets, their breaths slow and even. For a moment, Ethan stood there, his heart pounding in his chest, unsure of what to do. But then Mia stirred, her eyes fluttering open as she turned to face him. Her lips curled into a sly smile, her gaze sharp and knowing. "Couldn't sleep?" she murmured, her voice low and velvety, a sound that sent a shiver down his spine. Ethan didn't answer, his throat too dry to form words. Instead, he stepped forward, the air between them crackling with an electric intensity. Clara shifted beside her sister, her eyes opening slowly, her expression a mix of surprise and something darker, something he couldn't quite name. Mia sat up, the sheets slipping down to reveal the curve of her shoulders, her skin glowing in the moonlight. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his arm in a gesture that was both comforting and unnerving. "Come here," she said, her tone soft but firm, leaving no room for argument. Ethan hesitated for a moment longer before he climbed onto the bed, his movements slow and deliberate. The mattress dipped under his weight, the sisters shifting to make room for him. Mia's hand slid to the back of his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair as she pulled him closer, her lips brushing against his in a kiss that was soft and teasing. Clara watched them for a moment, her eyes dark with something that made Ethan's stomach twist. She reached out, her hand brushing against his chest, her touch tentative at first but growing bolder as she leaned in. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're here." The words seemed to break something inside him, a dam of restraint he hadn't realized he'd been holding on to. He pulled Clara closer, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was slow and deliberate, his hand tangling in her hair. Mia's lips brushed against his shoulder, her touch sending a jolt through his body as she guided him. The room was alive with the sounds of their breaths, the rustle of sheets, the soft murmurs that passed between them. Ethan's world narrowed to the feel of their hands on his skin, the warmth of their bodies pressed against his, the intoxicating rhythm of their movements. The tension that had been building all weekend finally reached its peak, a fire that consumed them all and left them breathless and spent. Ethan collapsed back against the mattress, his chest heaving, his heart still racing. The sisters lay beside him, their breaths shallow, their bodies tangled together in a way that felt both natural and forbidden. For a long moment no one spoke, the silence heavy with the weight of what they'd just done. Ethan stared up at the ceiling, his mind reeling, his body still thrumming with the aftershocks of pleasure. Mia turned to him, her lips curling into a sly smile. "Better?" she murmured, her voice low and teasing. Ethan didn't answer, his gaze flicking toward Clara, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. There was a new awareness in her eyes, a realization of something she couldn't yet name.